Welcome back to the second part of the introductory lecture, the Guyanese Linguistic Heritage. Now, in this part, what we want to look at is current attitudes to language. And then we're going to try to link those current attitudes to the historical realities that brought our linguistic situation about. But before we proceed, I'd like to call your attention to a mistake I made in the first part of the lecture. When I referred to the Caribbean Creoles, if you can go back at some point and check the map of Caribbean Creoles, you will notice that there is a Creole called Gullah in the southern United States. Gullah is not spoken in Florida, it's spoken in South Carolina. So please make a note of that. It may be useful to listen to what Saville Troika says about attitudes to language. She says attitudes are acquired as a factor of group membership, as part of the process of enculturation in a particular speech community, and are thus the basis of its characterization. In other words, what she's saying is that we don't come up with our attitudes by ourselves. Our attitudes are molded by the community we live in, so that we develop attitudes to other people's languages and to our own language by a kind of a social pressure from other people. Let's have a look at an example from the classroom. Now, I'm going to share with you an experience I had in a rural primary school some years ago. And you can tell me, if you're Guyanese or Caribbean, whether you can relate to this experience. Now, I am observing teaching in the classroom. It's a primary school and it's early morning and the teacher is about to mark the register. The children are sitting, chatting quietly. Of course, they're speaking Creolese and the teacher's marking, and then all of a sudden one child gets excited about something and she suddenly shouts out, "This awa! This awa!" And the teacher straightens up in class and looks at me and then looks very disappointed and annoyed at the children. "Who is speaking like that?" How many of you can relate to that kind of experience where your voice is taken in an offensive way? You offend somebody, you surprise somebody, you disappoint somebody because you speak loudly and confidently in Creole's attitudes. So, at the end of this segment of the lecture, it is expected that you will begin to appreciate the political dimension of language attitudes, how we move from group attitude to political status quo. It is also hoped that you can understand that to be aware of attitudes to language is to possess a cultural resource. There's a certain wealth in awareness. And then we expect you to see the connection between language endangerment, and you will come to understand what we mean by that, and language attitudes. I'd like you to take time before you continue this video to watch the two videos. They're very short. The first is 8 minutes, the second is 9 minutes, and then come back to the main lecture.
Imos mama daughter din. Yan niya at daughter din. She is my daughter din. We were Alexander daughter din. Imos mama daughter din. Yan niya at daughter din. Imos mama daughter din.
My name is Hubert Devnish. I'm a linguist. I study Caribbean Creole languages, and I'm going to introduce you to one of the languages I study, Berbice Dutch Creole. It is a language that my great-grandmother would have spoken, and we're going to meet that language through the last known speaker of that language, Mrs. Bertha Bell.
Henny Hartman.
Henny Hartman. Daughter. She is my daughter.
She is my daughter.
Amelia.
Abel Alexander.
Abel Alexander, daughter.
What about Chiema?
Daughter.
You would have heard her say over and over again, Dotete, Dotete, Dotete. Dotete means in Berbice Dutch Creole, dead. And she was saying that after the names of all of the people who used to speak the language but who were now dead. For me, that was a requiem for a language. All of the speakers, all of the names, Berry and all of the others, were dead. And as we heard it, we thought about the origins of that word. The Do is from a language called Kalabari in southern Nigeria that means die, and then the Te means has died. But what has happened in Berbice Dutch Creole is that the whole form Dotete was borrowed from Kalabari and they added on another Te to it. So in a sense you have has completely died if you take the literal meaning. And as we listened, we simply heard Dotete, Dotete, Dotete. Requiem for a language. Languages are like people. They are born, they grow up, and then eventually they get old, and then they die. What we have here is Bertha Bell at 103 back in the year 2003, the last known speaker of a dying language. Guyana was made up of 3 former Dutch colonies, those of Berbice, Demerara, and Essequibo. Dutch Creoles were spoken in all 3 of these colonies, but Berbice Dutch Creole was quite special. It had a vocabulary in which about 40% of its basic words came from a single West African language, Kalabari, which is a member of what they call the Eastern Ijo language group. We have already heard about Dote and Te, but there are other words like Mingi for water, like Yefi for eat, like Bifi for speak, which also come from Eastern Ijo. Berbice Dutch Creole also took some of its basic vocabulary from Arawak, the indigenous language spoken in the coastal areas of Guyana near the former Dutch settlements. One of these words is likely to have been Berbice. This word is also used as the name for the main river which runs through the areas where Berbice Dutch Creole was formerly spoken. In 2003, everybody who knew anything about the language presumed that all the speakers were dead. But I got news from the linguist Ian Robertson, who had rediscovered the language back in the 1970s, that there was indeed at least one last speaker who was still alive. So we flew with a group of linguistic students from Trinidad and Jamaica down to Guyana. We traveled overland to Jubilee Ranch on the Berbice River, which was the site of plantation Pear Boom, which was owned by the founder of the Berbice colony, Abraham Van Peer, way back in the 17th century. We walked down the hill from the ranch to the Berbice River, the Birbishi as they call it. And we got into a speedboat which took us across the river, but slightly downriver as well. We disembarked and walked towards the home of Bertha Bell. As I was going along, was wondering to myself, just like everybody else, what it would be like to meet a 103-year-old woman who was the last representative of a language and culture that had all but disappeared. As we go along, you see the house to the right, which is the house of her children and grandchildren. We pass it and we duck under some wire and approach her house. We are going to meet this language through its last remaining speaker.
What say you are now?
My name Ian Robertson.
Robertson.
Mm-hmm.
Where actually was she born, or where did she live when she was a child?
Okay. Wanga Yubante. Yubante Hiwi?
Repubi.
Um,
Tara.
Matara. Yubante with Matara.
See, same right?
Ban.
Was when was the first time she heard English? Does she know?
Okay. Teacher wa Yungu. You learned Babish for you learned English?
Linda. Teacher kwa Yungu. Eko. Yungu manaka. Anyway. Maybe Dutch. Dutch. English and Dutch.
You will be fair English met a Dutch.
Motor school Dutch. Motor school in Dutch. Dutch moika. Dojo mooi publifica. But English mooi publifica. English. You so careful issue.
How would you say the dogs eat the fish in Dutch Creole?
Dog eat fish.
Fraggy you, Hosuma beefy, the dog eat the fish in a Creole. Yeah. Under your fear?
The fishy.
Fishy. And if you want to say the dog eat the fish yesterday,
Okay, so
guess what? The dog eat the fish.
the fishy.
The dog ate the fish.
The dog might fish.
How do you say that in Dutch?
Huh?
The dog might eat some fish.
Might eat fishy.
Might eat the fishy. How am I eat the fish? What you man to you bante?
But I want to December.
You bante December?
Only per dog. Plenty. Only per dog.
What's enough dog?
Moose Honda.
Mucho Honda.
Moose Honda.
Mucho Honda.
Plenty dog.
Spirit.
To see how you go with it, son.
Bertha was having fun, the time of her life. And then came that tail end of the conversation where she said to one of the students, "See how your them turn up?" Which means, see how your breasts are standing up and firm? And I think I know exactly what she was going to say after that if the students hadn't interrupted with that laughter of embarrassment. I think she was going to say that once upon a time, my breasts too were firm and standing up just like yours, and so too was my language and my culture. But now tell me, what do you think? My name is Hubert Devnish. I am a linguist. I study the indigenous languages of the Caribbean. One of them is Lokono. When I think Lokono or Arawak, I think water. That means Tapakuma, Mainstay, Kapui, Mashabo, Iterabisi, or lakes in an area where Arawak used to be spoken. The Lokono historically occupied the coastal areas of Guyana and the lower reaches of its rivers. And when I think a second time of Lokono, both the language and its people, I think of a man, Uncle Kunu. His real name, Cecil Fredericks, and a fabled place of Lokono language and culture, Wakapau. In the main state Tapakoma area of Essequibo, Guyana, in 2005, only 4 or 5 speakers of Lokono could be found amongst the several thousand ethnic Lokono who lived in the area. And one of these was Uncle Kunu. The problem was, how did we manage, or how could we manage to get to him, to hear him speak? That's the story you will hear about. Uncle Kunu was a mysterious man. He lived by himself on land far away from the nearest Arawak or Lokono settlement in Tapakuma. On Saturday mornings, he would row his boat down the creek to a place called Red Lock. There, he would tie his boat, offload the cassava he reaped from his farm, and he would get transport to Anna Regina Market, where he would sell off his produce. We went to the Anna Regina Market looking for the mysterious Uncle Kunu. We found him in a rum shop. He agreed to come outside and to be interviewed.
In Iraq. Man, let me, you go see, I got to, first of all, I got to make an introduction.
Go on.
You ready? Okay, well, the English works. Go for stop here. Waman Nikada. Hey da. Wa Iranabe, Osada, School Moro. Well, that means they will have better access than we had in our young days. Yes. School Moro, no father. Hamarong, Namarita. Kena, Kafa Bari, Wamanika, Koro, Boda. Kena, Washikada, Iranabe, da, School Moro, also. Heda. In English?
You can answer anyone.
Okay. Well, my mother and my father is Arawak. So I have known Arawak from youth. Yes. So it's not something that I will have to learn. Both of us spend more time with mothers. And my mother speaks every day through in Arawak.
To you?
Yes.
They don't speak no other language? Just Arawak?
Yes, my father was very educated man, but he don't talk Arawak to us. No, that is a part of failure to us because he knows so much of good Arawak and he doesn't speak it to us. But the old lady, because we children just be with the mothers all the time, right? So I get the Arawak through the mother every day, so I could speak the Arawak now. Yeah.
Tell me that in Arawak.
Eh?
Tell me the same story, just tell me it in Arawak.
For your mother and father.
But your mother and your father and so.
Okay, Dachi, kena doyo, kanda, Lokono beda. Kena tra Lokono wa akakuda, kena papa kanda, Osakoba, Emekebu. Plataku, Wamanisha, at Barewabo, Plataku, Wamanisha. That means we are very poor. Our people, you know, very poor. Kafai Bari, tomorrow, Daita Bari, School Moro, Dausa, Kena, Chokotokan.
Wakapau is a Lokono or Arawak community on the Wakapau Creek, which is a tributary to the Pomeroon River in Essequibo, Guyana. We were told everywhere we went, if you want to hear Lokono spoken even by children, go to Wakapau. Wakapau, we heard, was the heartland of Lokono language and culture. So I sent one of our research students to Wakapau, Deidre Smith, to find out. There she meets Mrs. Thomas, a native Lokono speaker, who took her on a journey through the Lokono language and its culture.
What's the word for fire? Hiki. Hiki. Hiki or hiki. Hiki. You know? Okay. Hiki or hiki. So suppose I want to say my fire. Oh. When you say my fire, that's daime. Daime. He is in the farm. He is in his farm right now. How would I say that? Karu Lokono Kokai. Right? He is in his farm right now.
Iterabisi, Mainstay, Mashabo, Kapui, Tapakuma, and oh so few speakers of the Lokono language left. As these Lokono villages of the Essequibo coast sleep on the sides of these lakes, so too does the language. Are we seeing and hearing the permanent silencing of a tongue? I don't know. What do you think?
Dotate, dotate. Miss Bertha Bell telling about the death of her language, and she the last person carrying it. So the question is, why? There's a possible historical explanation that the coming of the British and the moving out of the Dutch, the creation of British colonial education, the information we have so far is that the British educators forbade the children to speak Dutch Creole in the schools. Could that possibly be the reason that the language died, or at least could that be a contributing factor to the death of the language? We leave the question open for more pondering and more discovery. The question the linguist asks at the end of the video on silencing of the tongues is, do you think we're witnessing the death of yet another language? The language called Lokono or Arawak, while it lies sleeping on the banks of the Pomeroon River, and while some of the elders still speak it, and some of the young people still speak it somewhat. But attitudes are different now than they were to Berbice Dutch so many centuries ago, and there is a movement in Wakapau to revitalize that language. So attitudes can bring about a shift in language use. And that's an important point for you to carry forward with you. So coming back to the university and that survey that was done in 2019, let me just joggle your memory again. One person noted that they were trilingual, Makushi, Creolese, and English, and another person noted that they were bilingual, Arikuna and English. But I put the question to you now. Why did only 2 students out of over 100 entering the University of Guyana claim competence in an indigenous language? And I will attempt to answer it by suggesting there are probably many more speakers of Makushi and Arikuna, but they don't come to UG because of the location of UG on the coast. And if we take a closer look at the map of Guyana, where the languages that are living, the languages that are endangered, and the languages we have lost are identified, maybe you can make a connection between the role of the university, the attitudes of the Guyanese people towards their languages, and the possible future of the Guyanese languages. Can we close with two activities before you move on to the third and final part of the lecture? First, think of a language experience you have had where you were made to feel embarrassed or ashamed or not confident about how you speak. And secondly, write a journal entry about how this first lecture affects your current thinking about language. Thank you.